Alberta Premier Danielle Smith's government will table and fast-track legislation on Monday to force teachers back to work. Smith also outlined her government's priorities in a new throne speech focused on sovereignty, economic growth, and Alberta's future within Canada, while Alberta NDP Leader Naheed Nenshi accused her of pursuing misguided priorities that he will oppose despite his caucus lacking the power to stop it. A new study found that Alberta's charter schools have outperformed every other type of school in the province on every test across all subjects and grades. And Alberta's municipal elections were filled with stories, most notably that the two major cities elected mayors who pursued woke policies in their campaigns. All that and more on this week's Alberta Roundup. I'm your host, Isaac Lamoureux, and let's jump right into that first story. So the Alberta government issued an order paper on Thursday highlighting that it will end the teachers' strike on Monday and force teachers back to work. According to the order paper, Bill 2, the Back to School Act, will be introduced and advanced through all legislative stages in a single day under Standing Order 77-2, with debate at each stage limited to 1 hour. A spokesperson for the Ministry of Finance told True North that the government is ensuring that students and teachers can return to the classrooms as soon as possible. They said, quote, "The decision to introduce the Back to School Act was not taken lightly, but it is the only responsible path forward to end ongoing disruptions, close achievement gaps, and restore confidence in our education system." The government's move follows nearly 3 weeks of province-wide job action involving about 51,000 teachers and 2,500 schools, affecting roughly 750,000 students. The government's last contract offer included a 12% wage increase over 4 years, which would have seen 3,000 new teachers and 1,500 educational assistants hired, and lifted pay grids so that more than 95% of the teachers would have seen raises up to 17%. But teachers overwhelmingly rejected that proposal, with almost 90% voting against it. And Alberta Teachers Association President Jason Schilling launched the strike with few clear demands on what would be required to end it. He accused the government of underfunding public education, citing classroom complexity and staff shortages as key issues. However, Smith has questioned whether class size caps are enforceable in the first place, noting that Alberta already has roughly 35,000 full-time teachers to 740,000 students, which would be 21 students per teacher. But of course, if you go off Schilling's number, which is 51,000 teachers, it would actually be a student-to-teacher ratio of 15-1. So Smith said, quote, "We just simply have a space restriction. We just had 100,000 kids almost come into the system in 3 years, and we have a physical space restriction that we are working through." Smith has also said that she can't just make schools appear from thin air. It takes time to build them. And the Finance Ministry told True North that it prefers to negotiate, but absent a reasonable offer being presented, action to restore and protect the students' right to learn will be taken. The spokesperson said, quote, "The government engaged in extensive negotiations with the Alberta Teachers Association over the past 18 months to reach a fair and reasonable settlement. Despite these efforts, 2 failed votes on settlements, either proposed or supported by the ATA, and a refusal by the ATA to engage in enhanced mediation, the ongoing strike has continued to harm students and families." For our next story, we'll stick a bit with the Alberta legislature, of course, talking about the recently delivered throne speech. So Lieutenant Governor Salma Lakhani opened the legislature on Thursday with a throne speech outlining Premier Smith's priorities for the fall session, centered on provincial sovereignty, economic development, and new initiatives in AI and energy security. A central theme covered by Lakhani was moving Alberta forward with results. And in a press release accompanying the speech, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith said, quote, "Albertans have been clear about their priorities, and this government is acting on them. Through this legislative session, we are putting those priorities into action with policies that strengthen healthcare, improve classrooms, protect freedoms, and advance nation-building projects." The speech credited Alberta's direct diplomacy with the United States for avoiding sweeping tariffs that once threatened tens of thousands of Alberta jobs and billions in lost provincial revenues, calling it a diplomatic victory that kept most of the exports tariff-free. The government reaffirmed its pledge to defend and exercise its constitutional jurisdiction against federal overreach, while continuing to expand relations with U.S. counterparts. Lakhani also spoke about Alberta's sovereignty and independence. She reaffirmed that the government believes in a strong, free, and sovereign Alberta within a united Canada. She said, quote, Sovereignty does not mean separation. Strength and self-determination do not have to mean national independence. However, she did specify that a majority of Albertans understand that the federal-provincial relationship is flawed and that Alberta should be empowered to pursue areas of its jurisdiction. Laconie confirmed the government was reviewing what it heard and learned from the Alberta Next town halls, with recommendations forthcoming. Smith's government vowed to stabilize provincial finances and safeguard Alberta's low tax advantage despite global instability and falling energy prices. The province remains committed to growing the Alberta Heritage Savings Trust Fund to more than $250 billion by 2050, prohibiting the government from spending investment returns until then, and ensuring that the province can excel without being reliant on non-renewable resources in the future. Laconie said, quote, "This government will hold spending increases below inflation plus population growth and invest wisely in health, education, roads, policing, and other core services." The government also announced plans to transform Alberta into a global hub for artificial intelligence, leveraging its abundant natural gas supply to power data centers. Laconie said, quote, "Alberta is already an energy superpower. Alberta will now also become an AI superpower, making our province a world leader in arguably the world's two most important commodities, energy and computing power." Infrastructure and immigration were also central themes. The speech promised $8.6 billion to open 200,000 new school spaces, thousands of new teaching positions, and major highway expansions, including the Deerfoot Trail, Yellowhead Trail, and Highways 3, 11, and 63. Smith's government signaled it will seek greater control over immigration, citing that the province's economy and culture has been entirely upended by the last 10 years of federal immigration policies, which have resulted in an unsustainable level of newcomers entering our province. The province pledged in its speech to use its constitutionally protected provincial rights to lower the number of immigrants entering Alberta. In terms of public safety, the provincial government pledged to fund, not defund the police, not enforce the Liberals' gun confiscation scheme, and oppose any legislation from the federal government that censors free speech. The address reiterated Alberta's commitment to protect free expression for regulated professionals, pledging that new legislation, when combined with last year's Alberta Bill of Rights amendments, would solidify Alberta's status as the freest jurisdiction in Canada. The government also stood by its ban on pornographic books in schools. The throne speech sets the stage for a busy fall session, with the Smith government expected to introduce at least 15 bills covering healthcare, education, public safety, and provincial sovereignty. Alberta NDP Leader Naheed Nenshi pledged to stand up against the United Conservative Party's legislative agenda. He accused Premier Daniel Smith's government of misguided priorities in a pre-session speech Wednesday, vowing to oppose the United Conservative Party's legislative agenda even though his caucus lacks the power to block it. Nenshi said, quote, "There's nothing in there on affordability or cost of living. The only bills that have anything to do with education are a potential bill to force the teachers back to work, and one to force trans kids even further into the closet, using for the first time in Alberta's history the notwithstanding clause." Nenshi pledged to oppose elements of the government's agenda, but of course the UCP's majority means the opposition can debate, delay, and criticize, but cannot prevent bills from passing. And speaking of schools, we'll look at a study on charter schools for our next story. A new study from secondstreet.org has found that Alberta's charter schools outperform public and Catholic schools across the board. The study examined 22 provincial achievement tests written between 2022 and 2024. It found that charter school students outperformed those in traditional public and Catholic schools on every test across all subjects and grades. On average, charter students scored 9.3 points higher than public school students and 7.7 points higher than Catholic school students. Bacchus Barua, secondstreet.org's research director and author of the study, said, quote, "Ask any parent if they want their child to go to a school where students tend to score nearly 10 points higher on average, and the answer is obvious." He said the provincial government should think about how it can help more students access these high-performing schools. The study found the largest gap in grade 9 mathematics, where charter students scored 14.1 percentage points higher than public school students in 2024, and the smallest gap was grade 6 science, where results were 6.2 points higher than Catholic schools. Provinces in Canada usually offer 3 choices for children's education: government-run public schools, including Catholic and Francophone, independent schools, and homeschooling. But Alberta offers a 4th choice with charter schools. Charter schools are tuition-free, government-funded, and must follow Alberta's curriculum, but they operate independently under non-profit boards. They must accept all students students if space allows, often through lottery systems, and focused on distinct learning approaches ranging from science, technology, engineering, and mathematics to classical education. Despite operating on slightly less funding than traditional public schools, which is about $9,400 per student compared to $10,460 per student in 2019-20, charter schools have achieved consistently stronger results. And of course, these findings come amid renewed debate over school choice in Alberta, because last week, Elections Alberta approved a citizen initiative petition that would ask voters whether to end public funding for independent schools, which would eliminate much of the school choice in the province. Many students attending independent schools do so because they were unable to find success in the public school system. And according to John Jagersma, the executive director of the Association of Independent Schools and Colleges in Alberta, he explained that if this petition passes, it would devastate his sector and force the public school system to absorb an additional 55,000 students, which doesn't seem to me like it would accommodate what the teachers are currently complaining about, which is classroom size. But taxpayers would also have to, in fact, pay more for these students, considering students currently attending independent schools receive only 70% of the funding they would get if they went to public schools. Paige McPherson, the Associate Director of Education Policy at the Fraser Institute, told True North that Alberta is a case study showing that higher education spending does not automatically yield better results. She said that the province outperforms almost every other in PISA, which is the Program for International Student Assessment Scores. And according to the study, Alberta's 48 charter schools now educate about 15,400 students, which is only 2% of the province's total enrollment. But of course, demands exceed capacity with an estimated 20,000 students on the wait lists. The study concluded, quote, "Charter schools not only provide parents and students with more choices in terms of education, but the findings show these schools outperform government-run public schools. On average, students attending charter schools outperform students attending government-run traditional public and government-run Catholic schools in all 22 of 22 instances where comparisons could be made between 2022 and 2024. But for our last story today, we'll actually cover various stories and the many aspects of the province's municipal election results. So Alberta's two major cities both elected mayors who supported numerous woke policies in their campaigns, and starting off with Edmonton, which saw delayed results that eventually crowned Andrew Knack as the new mayor. The results were of course extremely delayed compared to Calgary's, taking days longer to tally. Lawyer and Edmontonian Eva Chipiuk raised her concerns on X. She said, quote, "Edmonton is the capital of Alberta. If it wants to be taken seriously, it needs to act seriously. The problem is not the process, it's the people running it." Thanks to Alberta implementing sweeping changes to local election laws in April 2024, all automated voting equipment like electronic tabulators became prohibited at municipal elections, and votes were required to be counted by hand. But while some left-wing pundits have tried to blame the government's change for Edmonton's slow pace in tallying the votes, that is clearly without substance, considering Calgary had no issue getting the results out in a timely fashion. In fact, Calgary's election was called the night of the election. Some X-users suggested that this could be a plot by NDP supporters in Edmonton to create the illusion that the province cannot hold elections. Local journalist David Staples raised a similar point, reminding Edmontonians that paper ballots had been counted in a timely fashion for decades without electronic vote counters. He said, quote, "The incompetence of our modern city hall is breathtaking." And he highlighted that as of 10 a.m. on Tuesday, Edmonton had counted and reported 54,477 votes. Conversely, Calgary had counted and reported 348,642, which was enough to crown the new mayor, Jeremy Farkas. But as for Knack, he supported many woke policies in his campaign, including drug consumption sites, the single-use plastics bylaw, 15-minute cities, bike lanes, and more. Some of the policies he supported, such as bike lanes and the single-use plastics bylaw, were only supported by him when the top candidates faced off in a question and answer. And some of his funding pledges, like harm prevention, drew criticism from other candidates. For example, Tim Cartmell said, quote, "I'll be a strong advocate here for provincial support, but we cannot put more taxpayer money toward this. Edmontonians are stretched too thin. A Knack government will increase your taxes for this issue." Like Knack, Calgary elected a mayor who supported woke policies in his campaign. During the campaign, Jeremy Farkas pushed woke policies like implementing hate tracking programs, opposing Alberta's efforts to enforce its ban on child gender transition, and celebrated being pro-immigration. For example, Farkas pointed to how his platform includes hate tracking and education programs, culturally competent training for first responders, and the housing equity roadmap to ensure our housing system works for racialized, newcomer, Indigenous, disabled, and 2S LGBTQI residents. He also suggested that he would support bike lanes and even lowering speed speed limits, and he advocated also for masking during the pandemic lockdowns, even celebrating that he required his team to do so. During a municipal debate among the Calgary mayoral candidates, Farkas opposed rhetoric around Alberta separatism and framed the city as a key part of Team Canada. He called the fact that 1/3 of Calgarians not being born in North America as a strength. And despite Farkas being the mayor for now, Sonia Sharp has actually formally requested a recount following her very narrow loss to him in Monday's election. The two were separated by just 585 votes, which is a margin of 0.16%. She said, quote, "Thank you to every Calgarian who voted. With a margin of just 585 votes, I will be requesting a recount to ensure every ballot is properly counted. Win or lose, I am grateful for the opportunity and will fully accept the outcome because every voice matters." In an attached statement, Sharp confirmed she had requested the Chief Returning Officer undertake a recount of the October 20th municipal election under the Local Authorities Election Act. Sharp said the request is not meant as a criticism of Calgary's election staff, but as a precaution given the slim difference in votes. She said, quote, "Yesterday was challenging for our election workers. Long lines, new procedures, and hand-counting ballots well into the early hours of the morning. This request is by no means a criticism of their hard work. Instead, it suggests that mistakes can occur during stressful situations. Given the razor-thin margin of victory in this election, it makes ample sense to review and double-check that appropriate processes were followed and the count is accurate." And under Alberta's Local Authorities Election Act, candidates may request a recount if the difference between the two top candidates is within 0.5% of the total ballots cast. The request must be submitted within 72 hours after official results are declared, and it can only be made by the candidate with the second highest number of votes or their agent. Election Calgary's guidelines state that affected candidates must receive 12 hours' notice before the recount begins, and that the recount will be conducted using the same procedures as on Election Day. Candidates, their agents, or scrutineers are encouraged to attend and observe. The current official results have Farkas with 91,071 votes and Sharp with 90,490. Sharp said she will not issue further comments until the recount process is complete. She said, quote, "I am happy to accept the outcome of this review, win or lose, because the final word of our citizens is what matters most in local government." Meanwhile, just finishing off here with one quick tidbit about Calgary's election to close things off is that Gondek's loss marks the first time that an incumbent mayor of Calgary has been defeated in a re-election bid since 1980 when Ross Alger lost to Ralph Klein. That wraps up this week's Alberta Roundup. My name's Isaac Lamoureux. Have a great weekend. Thank you and God bless.